Before we begin, find yourself somewhere comfortable. This is a story told at the pace of starlight, meant for those quiet hours when the mind is ready to wander and wonder. If you drift away while listening, that is perfectly fine. The pyramids have waited 4,500 years to share their secrets. They can wait a little longer for you to return. What lies beneath the pyramids of Giza? Not inside them, but beneath them. This is the question that has haunted explorers, archaeologists, and dreamers for centuries, and it is a question that refuses to offer simple answers. The Giza Plateau sits under the Egyptian sky like a monument to permanence, 3 pyramids rising from golden sand, the Sphinx crouching nearby with its weathered face turned toward the sunrise. Millions of tourists visit each year, cameras flashing, guides reciting facts that have been recited 1,000 times before. The Great Pyramid of Khufu, the Pyramid of Khafre, the smaller Pyramid of Menkaure. These are the landmarks everyone knows, the images that appear in textbooks and documentaries, the structures that seem to define ancient Egypt itself. But here is what the tourist brochures do not tell you, what the guides often gloss over, what even Egyptologists have debated in whispers for more than a century. There is another world beneath these monuments, a world of tunnels, shafts, chambers, and voids. A world that modern technology is only now beginning to reveal. A world that ancient writers described in detail, yet scholars dismissed as legend for hundreds of years, until the legends started proving true. In March of 2025, a team of Italian researchers stood before a crowd of delegates at a press conference in Cairo. They had news, the kind of news that makes headlines around the world. Using satellite-based synthetic aperture radar technology combined with artificial intelligence, they claimed to have found evidence of massive underground structures beneath the Pyramid of Khafre. Not small chambers, not modest tunnels. They spoke of 8 enormous cylindrical shafts descending deep into the earth. They spoke of spiral pathways surrounding these shafts. They spoke of a network extending more than 2,000 feet below the surface. They spoke of a hidden city. The scientific community erupted, as it always does when extraordinary claims arrive without extraordinary proof. Some called it the discovery of the century, others called it nonsense. The former Minister of Antiquities, who has spent his life studying these monuments, issued responses questioning the technology and the interpretation. Radar specialists from universities around the world wondered aloud whether any instrument could penetrate that deep through solid rock with meaningful accuracy. The debate continues even now, voices raised in excitement and skepticism, both sides certain of their positions. But here is the interesting part, the part that makes you pause and wonder. This is not the first time someone has claimed to find hidden structures beneath Giza. It is not even the 10th time. For as long as humans have wondered about the pyramids, they have wondered what lies beneath them. And the strangest part of all, the part that keeps the question alive across generations, is this. Some of those claims have turned out to be true. Beneath the Great Pyramid, carved directly into the bedrock of the plateau, sits a chamber that has puzzled researchers for nearly 200 years. To reach it, you must descend through a narrow passage that slopes downward at an angle of roughly 26 degrees, the walls pressing close, the air growing thick and heavy. After approximately 100 meters, the passage opens into darkness. This is the subterranean chamber, a space roughly 14 meters by 8 meters, its ceiling smooth in places, its floor carved into strange shapes that no one has ever satisfactorily explained. The traditional explanation is simple and clean. The pharaoh Khufu originally planned to be buried deep in the bedrock, following the tradition of earlier pyramids. Workers began carving out a burial chamber beneath the monument. Then something changed. Perhaps Khufu changed his mind. Perhaps his architects developed a better plan. Whatever the reason, the subterranean chamber was abandoned, the workers stopped digging, and the king decided to be buried higher up within the pyramid itself. That is the official story, logical and neat, fitting the narrative of a straightforward tomb built for a single purpose. But look closer at that chamber and the story starts to fray at the edges. The floor is not simply unfinished, it is carved into deliberate shapes. 2 mounds rise from the bedrock, separated by a trench. A deep pit has been cut into the eastern section. A narrow passage extends south from the chamber wall. running for about 16 meters before ending abruptly in a blank wall. Some researchers have suggested that this floor, with its mounds and trench, resembles the Nile Valley itself, a symbolic recreation of the Egyptian world carved into stone beneath the monument to eternal death. The Greek historian Herodotus visited Egypt around 450 BC, roughly 2,000 years after the Great Pyramid was built. He wrote that Pharaoh Khufu was buried in a chamber beneath the pyramid, on an island surrounded by water, the water brought through underground channels connected to the Nile. For centuries, scholars dismissed this account. Herodotus was wrong, they said. He was repeating tourist guide stories, tall tales meant to impress gullible Greeks. But then, in 1999, archaeologists finally succeeded in pumping out the water from a vertical shaft located near the causeway of Khafra's pyramid, a shaft that had been known for centuries but never fully explored because of flooding. What they found at the bottom, nearly 30 meters below the surface of the plateau, was extraordinary. A rectangular chamber carved from solid bedrock. In the center of this chamber, a stone platform rose from the floor, leaving a channel of water surrounding it on all sides. An island. And on that island sat a massive granite sarcophagus, empty but intact. They call it the Osiris shaft, named for the god of the underworld, and it proved something remarkable. Herodotus had been right. An underground island surrounded by water with a sarcophagus at its center. It existed. The ancient historian had described real structures, not fantasies. If he was right about that, what else might he have been right about? What other chambers lie beneath the monuments waiting to be found? What other passages extend into the bedrock, their entrances hidden by sand and time? The Giza plateau is not solid stone. It is riddled with natural fissures, ancient quarries, and man-made excavations. The water table sits only 20 to 30 meters below the surface, feeding into underground aquifers that have never been fully mapped. The builders of the pyramids were capable of engineering feats that still defy complete explanation, and despite more than 2 centuries of systematic archaeology, new discoveries continue to emerge. In 2016, an international research team announced that they had discovered a massive void inside the Great Pyramid using muon tomography, a technology that detects cosmic ray particles as they pass through solid structures. This void, roughly 30 meters long, had been hidden inside the world's most studied ancient monument, undetected until the second decade of the 21st century. In 2024, Japanese and Egyptian researchers used ground-penetrating radar to detect an L-shaped structure buried beneath the Western Cemetery, a structure approximately 10 meters by 15 meters that appeared to have been deliberately filled with sand, as if someone wanted to hide its entrance. The pyramids keep their secrets well, but perhaps not forever. Each decade brings new technologies, new methods of seeing through stone, new ways of asking old questions, and beneath it all, the water table rises and falls with the seasons, just as the Nile rose and fell above it when the pyramids were young. What lies beneath the pyramids? The answer depends on whom you ask. Mainstream scholars maintain that the mysteries have been largely solved, the questions answered, the debate settled. But then you have the anomalies, the discoveries that do not fit neatly into categories, the chambers that exist for no clear purpose, the passages that end in blank walls, the voids detected but never explored. The journey we are beginning together is a descent into that darkness. Not a frantic search for treasure or lost civilizations, but a patient exploration of what is known, what has been found, and what remains hidden. We will move slowly, pausing at each discovery, allowing the mystery to unfold at its own pace. The pyramids have waited this long. They can wait while we take our time. And if you find yourself drifting off while listening, that is exactly as it should be. The chambers beneath Giza have sat in darkness for millennia. They understand patience. They understand silence. They understand that some secrets are meant to be contemplated in the space between waking and sleep, where wonder and rest become the same thing. The real story lies below the surface where the sun never reaches, where water drips in the silence, where passages end in blank walls, where sarcophagi wait empty in chambers built by unknown hands for purposes we can only guess. In the chapters that follow, we will descend together, one level at a time, into that world beneath the monuments. We will explore what has been found and what remains to be discovered. We will separate what is known from what is claimed, what is possible from what is fantasy. But for now, know this: the ground beneath the pyramids is not solid. It never was. And somewhere in that honeycomb of stone and water, in passages that may connect or may end in darkness, the ancient world waits with a patience that makes centuries feel like moments. The subterranean chamber has waited since the reign of Khufu. The Osiris shaft has kept its island hidden until modern pumps could reach it. And there are other chambers, other shafts, other mysteries that have not yet revealed themselves. We will find them together one by one in the darkness where the pyramids keep their deepest truths. Deep beneath the Great Pyramid, carved into the bedrock that has supported these monuments for 45 centuries, lies a room that refuses to offer simple explanations. The subterranean chamber sits there in the darkness, waiting as it has always waited, patient and silent and strange. To reach it, you would descend through a passage that slopes downward at an angle that makes you lean forward slightly as you walk. The ceiling pressing low overhead, the walls narrowing around you. The ancient Egyptians cut this corridor through solid limestone, working in lamplight, breathing air that grew thicker with every metre they descended into the earth. The passage runs for roughly 100 metres, a distance that feels much longer in the confined space, and then it levels out and opens into something unexpected. The first modern explorer to document this chamber was an Italian sea captain named Giovanni Caviglia, a man who had become obsessed with the pyramids in the way that certain people become obsessed with unsolvable puzzles. In 1817, Caviglia cleared away the rubble that had blocked the descending passage for centuries, debris from ancient roof collapses and sand that had filtered down through cracks in the stone. He pushed through to the chamber below, carrying lamps that cast uncertain light on walls that had not been seen in more than 2,000 years. What he found was not a treasure vault gleaming with gold. It was not a pristine tomb prepared for a king. It was a rough-hewn cave, half-finished, abandoned in what appeared to be the middle of construction. The chamber measures approximately 14 metres from east to west and 8 metres from north to south, dimensions that feel simultaneously vast and claustrophobic when you stand inside them in the darkness. The ceiling is relatively flat, smooth in places where you can still see the marks of copper tools, rough in others where the work simply stopped. But the floor is something else entirely. The floor looks like a frozen sea, like stone that was somehow liquid once and then hardened mid-wave. Mounds of uncut rock rise in some areas, deep trenches cut through others. A pit near the eastern wall drops into darkness, its bottom filled now with rubble from the explorers who came after Caviglia, men who dug and searched and found nothing but more rock. The traditional explanation for this chamber is straightforward and sensible. When Pharaoh Khufu began construction of his pyramid, around 2580 BC, his architects planned to follow the model of earlier royal burials. The king would be interred deep in the bedrock beneath the monument, safe from tomb robbers who might one day breach the upper structure. Workers began carving the subterranean chamber accordingly, cutting the descending passage from the north face of the pyramid, excavating a large space in the rock below. Then something changed. Perhaps Khufu decided he wanted to be buried higher up, closer to the sky, closer to the gods who ruled from above. Perhaps his architects developed the revolutionary idea of building chambers within the pyramid itself, something never attempted on this scale before. Perhaps there were structural concerns about the stability of the underground site, worries about water seeping up from the aquifer that lies beneath the plateau. Whatever the reason, the subterranean chamber was abandoned. Work stopped mid-carving. The workers moved upward to begin excavating what would become the Queen's Chamber, and eventually the King's Chamber. This explanation is clean and logical. It fits the archaeological evidence as traditionally interpreted. It makes sense in the way that simple answers often make sense. But there are problems with it. Small inconsistencies that grow larger the more you think about them. Details that do not quite align with the story of straightforward abandonment. The first problem is the floor itself. If the chamber was simply abandoned mid-construction, you would expect to see the kind of random mess that appears when workers walk away from a job. Piles of rubble in no particular pattern, scattered tools perhaps, the marks of hasty departure, of work interrupted by a change of plans. What you actually see in the subterranean chamber is something different, something that looks almost deliberate. The uneven floor is not random. The two mounds on the western side are roughly symmetrical, rising to similar heights, positioned as if to balance each other. The trench between them is cut in a consistent pattern, not jagged like an abandoned excavation, but smooth like something carved with intention. The overall shape, if you could somehow see it from above, resembles something. Some researchers have suggested it resembles the Nile Valley itself, the river that gave life to ancient Egypt, the waterway along which the entire civilization was built. Think about that for a moment, slowly, the way thoughts arrive in the quiet hours before sleep. The ancient Egyptians built everything along the banks of a single river. The Nile was not just water, it was life itself. Its annual floods deposited the fertile soil that made agriculture possible. Its waters provided transportation, irrigation, sustenance. Without the Nile, there would have been no Egypt, no pyramids, no pharaohs, nothing but desert extending in all directions under an implacable sun. What if the subterranean chamber was not unfinished at all? What if it was completed exactly as intended? The strange floor carved deliberately to represent the Egyptian world itself, with the two mounds symbolizing the eastern and western banks of the Nile, and the trench between them representing the river. What if this was not a failed burial chamber, but a ritual space, a symbolic recreation of the land of the living beneath the monument to eternal death? This theory remains controversial. Many Egyptologists dismiss it, pointing to the lack of finishing work on the ceiling, the absence of decorative elements, the general roughness of the excavation. But the theory gained unexpected support from an ancient source, a Greek historian who visited Egypt when the pyramids were already impossibly old. Herodotus arrived in Egypt around 450 BC, roughly 2,000 years after the Great Pyramid was built. He was shown the monuments by local guides, men whose ancestors had been telling stories about these structures for generation after generation, stories passed down through centuries like precious objects handed from father to son. Herodotus recorded what he was told, and what he was told is remarkable. According to the accounts Herodotus heard, Pharaoh Khufu was not buried in a chamber inside the pyramid. He was buried in a chamber beneath the pyramid, on an island surrounded by water. The water was brought through underground channels connected to the Nile. The king rested eternally in a symbolic river, just as his kingdom had rested along the real river above. For centuries, scholars dismissed this account as fantasy. Herodotus never claimed to have seen the underground chamber himself. He admitted that the Egyptian priests refused to let him descend. He was repeating hearsay, tourist gossip, the exaggerated tales of guides seeking tips from gullible foreigners. But look again at that subterranean chamber with Herodotus's words in mind. The two mounds, the trench between them, the pit near the eastern wall that might once have held water, that even today shows signs of past flooding from the water table below. What if Herodotus was right? Not in every detail perhaps, but in the essential truth of what he described. An underground chamber designed to incorporate water, an island in the darkness, a king's eternal rest surrounded by the element that had sustained his kingdom in life. The chamber itself is not the only mystery waiting in that darkness beneath the pyramid. Extending south from the southern wall is a passage that appears to go nowhere, a corridor that runs for approximately 16 meters straight into the bedrock before ending abruptly in a blank wall. Why was it cut? Where was it supposed to lead? The official explanation is simple enough. Workers intended to carve a second chamber beyond the first, perhaps a storage room, perhaps a subsidiary burial. When the project was abandoned, so was this extension. The passage simply stops because the workers stopped. But others have raised a different possibility, one that whispers at the edges of certainty. What if the passage does not actually end? What if there is something beyond that blank wall, something that has never been breached, a continuation of the tunnel sealed deliberately and waiting still for someone to find it? We do not know. The Egyptian authorities have not authorized drilling through that wall. Ground-penetrating radar has not been deployed in the chamber with sufficient resolution to answer the question. The mystery remains, patient as stone, content to wait another century or another millennium if necessary. And then there is the pit, that square shaft dropping down into darkness near the eastern wall of the chamber. It is roughly 4 meters deep, though the exact depth is difficult to determine because the bottom is filled with rubble and debris from nearly 2 centuries of exploration. In the 1830s, a British Army officer named Colonel Howard Vyse ordered the pit cleared. His workers dug down through the debris, expecting to find something significant. They found more rock. Or did they? Some accounts from the period suggest that the pit was not fully excavated, that the workers encountered groundwater and gave up, that the fill at the bottom may conceal further depth, a passage perhaps extending deeper into the earth, connecting to the aquifer that runs beneath the plateau. This is where speculation becomes dangerous, where the imagination can run ahead of evidence, creating mysteries where none may exist. But here is what we know for certain. The subterranean chamber exists. It is real. The floor is carved into shapes that have never been satisfactorily explained. A passage extends south and ends in a blank wall. A pit drops down and ends in rubble. No complete excavation has been conducted. No definitive answers have been provided. The chamber has been known since 1817. In all that time, more than 200 years of modern archaeology, no complete investigation has answered the basic questions about its purpose. The floor remains unexplained. The passage remains unexcavated beyond its visible end. The pit remains partially filled with debris, and beneath it all the water table rises and falls with the seasons, just as the Nile rose and fell above it when the pyramids were young, when Khufu ruled and workers carved by lamplight and the future was unimaginable. The darkness down there is patient. The stone does not care whether we understand it tomorrow or in another 1,000 years. The subterranean chamber waits as it has always waited, holding whatever secrets it holds, content in its silence. And perhaps that is enough for now. The chamber will be there when we return. In the next part of our journey, we will descend even deeper to a shaft that plunges through 3 levels to reach something extraordinary, an island in the darkness where Herodotus' words became stone and water and truth. Walk south from the Great Pyramid of Khufu. Cross the ancient causeway that once connected the pharaoh's mortuary temple to the valley below, that ceremonial pathway where priests carried offerings and performed rituals when these monuments were still new and gleaming white under the African sun. Stop at an unremarkable spot in the limestone pavement, a place where tourists pass by the thousands every single day without ever knowing what lies beneath their feet. Here, hidden by a simple metal grate, begins one of the strangest journeys in Egyptian archaeology. They call it the Osiris Shaft, named for the god of the underworld, the lord of the dead, the ruler of the afterlife. And what you find at the bottom of this shaft reads like something from an ancient myth, except that it is real, carved in stone and filled with water that has waited in darkness for millennia. The shaft was known in antiquity. Medieval Arab writers mentioned underground passages at Giza, tunnels that supposedly connected the pyramids to secret chambers filled with treasure or knowledge. European explorers in the 18th and 19th centuries documented the upper levels of the shaft. Giovanni Caviglia, that same Italian sea captain who explored the subterranean chamber beneath the Great Pyramid, descended into the first level of the Osiris Shaft in the 1830s. Colonel Howard Vyse, continuing Caviglia's work, noted the shaft on his maps and assigned it a number in his meticulous cataloguing of the plateau's features. But none of these early explorers could reach the bottom. The reason was simple and insurmountable: water. The Giza Plateau sits atop a limestone formation riddled with natural fissures and ancient quarries, and beneath this stone an aquifer holds water that has accumulated over thousands of years. The water table fluctuates with the seasons and the flow of the Nile. In some years it rises high enough to flood the lower chambers of underground structures. In other years it recedes, leaving damp stone and crystalline deposits where minerals have leached from the rock. When early explorers attempted to descend the Osiris Shaft, they encountered this water at the lowest levels. The chamber at the bottom was flooded. Pumps of that era proved inadequate to the task. An Egyptian archaeologist named Selim Hassan, working at Giza in the 1930s, tried for 4 years to pump out the shaft. He failed. The water simply kept returning, fed by the aquifer below, patient and inexorable as time itself. The mystery deepened in that failure. What was down there? Why had the ancient Egyptians carved such an elaborate shaft if it was just going to flood? Was there something at the bottom worth finding, or was the flooding itself part of the purpose, part of some ritual or symbolic meaning that modern minds struggle to comprehend? The answers would have to wait another 60 years. In 1999, archaeologists assembled a team to finally excavate the Osiris shaft to its lowest level. Modern pumping technology had improved dramatically. The water table had dropped in recent decades, partly due to changes in Nile management after the construction of the Aswan High Dam far to the south. For the first time in recorded history, a full scientific excavation of the shaft became possible. What they discovered would vindicate an ancient historian who'd been dismissed as a fantasist for centuries, would prove that sometimes the old stories contain kernels of truth that survive across millennia, waiting patiently to be confirmed. The Osiris shaft descends through 3 distinct levels, each one deeper and stranger than the last. The first level lies about 10 meters below the surface. Here the shaft opens into a small chamber containing 6 carved niches, spaces cut into the rock for purposes that remain unclear. Pottery fragments and human bones were found at this level, dated through stylistic analysis to roughly 500 BC, nearly 2,000 years after the pyramids were built. This level appears to have been used during the late period of Egyptian history, long after the Old Kingdom that produced the great monuments above. But the shaft continues down through solid bedrock, a vertical tunnel carved with precision that still impresses modern engineers. The second level lies at approximately 20 meters depth. Here the excavators found a larger chamber with more niches carved into the walls. 2 massive granite sarcophagi occupied this level, empty but impressive, their stone lids displaced by unknown hands in the distant past. More pottery, more bones, more evidence of activity during that late period when Egypt had already become ancient, when the pyramids were tourist attractions for Greeks and Persians, just as they are tourist attractions for us now. The second level was clearly important to someone, important enough to warrant the carving of heavy stone coffins and the transport of bodies down a narrow vertical shaft in the darkness. But the shaft continues down, and this is where the story becomes extraordinary, where myth and stone and water converge into something that makes you reconsider what you thought you knew about the ancient world. The third level lies at approximately 30 meters below the surface of the plateau. To reach it, the excavators had to pump out water that had accumulated for millennia, water that kept rising as the pumps ran, fed by the aquifer that refuses to be completely drained. But eventually they succeeded, and what they found was unlike anything else at Giza, perhaps unlike anything else in Egypt. The third level is a rectangular chamber roughly 9 meters by 9 meters, carved from solid bedrock with walls that show the marks of ancient tools. In the center of this chamber rises a stone platform, also carved from the bedrock, leaving a channel of water surrounding it on all sides. An island. And on that island sits a massive granite sarcophagus weighing between 10 and 15 tons, empty but intact, its presence raising more questions than it could ever answer. An island surrounded by water with a sarcophagus at its center. This is exactly what Herodotus described 2,500 years ago when he wrote that Pharaoh Khufu was buried in a chamber beneath the pyramid on an island surrounded by water, brought through underground channels from the Nile. Scholars had dismissed this account for centuries. Herodotus was wrong, they said with confidence. He was repeating tall tales, the exaggerated stories of tour guides seeking to impress credulous foreigners. He never saw what he described. He admitted as much in his writings. But here it was, precisely as the ancient Greek had recorded it. An underground island surrounded by water with a stone coffin waiting in the darkness. Herodotus had been right, or at least right enough that his description matched reality in all its essential details. Now, to be clear and honest in our exploration, the Osiris shaft is not directly beneath the Great Pyramid. It is located near the causeway of the Pyramid of Khafre, several hundred meters from Khufu's monument. The sarcophagus does not contain the remains of Khufu. The chamber appears to date, at least in its current form, to that late period, long after the pyramid builders had turned to dust. But this raises more questions than it answers, opens more mysteries than it closes. Did the ancient Egyptians of the late period create this elaborate structure as a symbolic tomb for Osiris, inspired by older legends about underground burials at Giza? Or did they excavate and expand an older structure, one that dated back to the Pyramid Age itself, adding their own elements to something that had already existed in the bedrock for 2,000 years? The precision of the cuts in the deepest chamber, the ambition of the design, the sheer difficulty of carving such a space 30 meters below ground, all of this suggests a level of skill and determination that points backward in time to the era when Egypt commanded resources on a scale difficult to imagine now. In Egyptian mythology, Osiris was murdered by his brother Set, his body dismembered and scattered across Egypt in an act of brutal fratricide. His wife Isis gathered the pieces and reassembled them, allowing Osiris to become the ruler of the underworld, the judge of the dead, the eternal king who presided over the afterlife. The Nile was intimately associated with this myth. The annual flooding of the river represented the resurrection of Osiris, the return of life to the land, the eternal cycle of death and rebirth that defined Egyptian cosmology. An underground chamber that flooded naturally, creating an island around a sarcophagus, would have been a powerful symbol of this myth made manifest in stone and water. The water would rise and fall with the seasons just as Osiris died and was reborn, just as the Nile brought life and then receded, just as all things moved through cycles that no human power could control or stop. This is speculation, of course. We cannot prove that the ancient builders intended such symbolism, but we can say with certainty that the Osiris shaft exists, that it contains an island surrounded by water, and that Herodotus described exactly this configuration when the shaft was already ancient beyond reckoning. The water has risen again in recent years, partially reflooding the third level, reclaiming the chamber as it has been reclaimed and cleared and reclaimed again across the centuries. Access to the shaft is restricted now. The Egyptian government limits exploration. The mysteries multiply faster than the answers can accumulate, and somewhere in that darkness, 30 meters below the footsteps of tourists who do not know it is there, the island waits with its empty sarcophagus, patient as only stone and water can be patient. What else did Herodotus describe that we have not yet found? What other chambers wait beneath the plateau, their entrance is hidden, their purposes lost to time? The ancient historian was right about the island. Perhaps he was right about other things as well. In the next part of our journey, we will explore how modern science learned to see through solid stone, how cosmic rays from distant stars revealed secrets that had been hidden for 45 centuries. There are moments in archaeology when the impossible becomes possible, when technology opens doors that have been locked for thousands of years, not with force but with patience, not with picks and shovels but with particles that rain down from space itself. In November of 2017, an international team of researchers made an announcement that would change our understanding of the Great Pyramid forever. They had discovered something inside the monument that no one had ever seen, something that had been hidden since the reign of Khufu, invisible to every explorer who had crawled through the pyramid's passages with torches and lamps and modern electric lights. They called it the Big Void, and it was enormous, roughly 30 meters long, located directly above the Grand Gallery, in a part of the pyramid that was supposed to be solid stone. This was not a small discovery. This was not a crack in the masonry or a minor gap between blocks. This was a space the size of a commercial airplane hidden inside the world's most studied ancient monument, undetected until the second decade of the 21st century. To understand how this discovery was made, you need to understand something beautiful about the universe we inhabit. High above the Earth's atmosphere, cosmic rays strike molecules of nitrogen and oxygen, creating cascades of subatomic particles. Among these particles are muons, unstable cousins of electrons that rain down on the planet at a rate of about 10,000 per square meter every minute. They pass through you as you sit or stand or lie down listening to these words. They pass through buildings and mountains and pyramids, most of them continuing on through the Earth itself and out the other side. But not all muons pass through at the same rate. Dense materials slow them down, absorb them. Empty spaces allow them to pass through more freely. If you place detectors inside a structure and count the muons arriving from different directions, you can create a kind of X-ray image of what lies above, seeing through solid stone without ever drilling a hole or moving a single block. This technology is called muon tomography, and it requires immense patience. You must place your detectors and wait, counting particles one by one as they arrive from space accumulating data over months or years until a pattern emerges from the randomness. It is archaeology at the speed of cosmic rays, which is to say very slowly, which is to say at exactly the pace these ancient monuments deserve. The team working on the Great Pyramid placed their detectors in the Grand Gallery, that soaring corbelled passage that rises at a steep angle through the heart of the monument. They waited. They counted muons arriving from above, and gradually over many months they saw something unexpected in their data. Too many muons were arriving from one particular direction, more than should have been able to pass through if the stone above the Grand Gallery was solid and uniform. There was a void up there, an empty space, a chamber or corridor or gap that had never been documented in any exploration, never mentioned in any ancient text, never suspected by any archaeologist in 2 centuries of systematic study. The announcement sent ripples through the scholarly world as such announcements always do. Some researchers were excited, speculating that this might be the true burial chamber of Khufu, that the king's chamber with its empty sarcophagus had been a decoy, that the real treasures lay hidden in this newly detected space. Others were skeptical, arguing that such voids are common in pyramid construction, empty spaces left deliberately to relieve pressure on the chambers below, architecturally necessary but ritually meaningless. The debate continues to this day, quiet and scholarly and patient. What is the big void? Is it a hidden chamber waiting to be explored? Is it a construction gap with no significance beyond the engineering requirements of building a mountain from 2 million limestone blocks? We do not yet know, and perhaps that is acceptable for now. The void has waited 4,500 years to be detected. It can wait a while longer to be understood. What matters for our journey through the darkness beneath and within these monuments is this. The pyramids still hold secrets. Despite 2 centuries of exploration, despite ground-penetrating radar and satellite imaging and cosmic ray detectors, despite every technology we can bring to bear on these ancient stones, they continue to surprise us. They continue to reveal that what we thought was solid may be hollow, that what we thought was known may be mysterious, that what we thought was settled may be only beginning. The big void is not the only recent discovery. In 2023, another team using similar techniques detected a corridor behind the chevron stones on the pyramid's north face, a space that had been sealed since antiquity, filled with sand or perhaps empty, its purpose unknown. Access was gained through a tiny camera inserted through the stones, revealing a corridor extending into the darkness, leading somewhere or perhaps nowhere, its secrets still waiting. These discoveries happen slowly, announced in scientific journals, debated in conferences, explored with caution and care. There are no dramatic revelations, no sudden unlocking of chambers filled with gold. There is only patience, technology improving by small increments, questions asked with increasing precision, and occasionally, very occasionally, answers that raise more questions than they resolve. The pyramids were built to outlast human memory, and they have succeeded. They contain spaces we have not found, purposes we do not understand, techniques we cannot fully replicate. And somewhere in that stone, in those hidden voids revealed by particles from space, the ancient builders left mysteries that transcend the simple question of where a king was buried. In the next part of our journey we will return to those ancient sources, to Herodotus and others who wrote what they heard and saw, whose words we dismissed and are now learning to trust. Herodotus travelled to Egypt when the pyramids were already ancient beyond comprehension, already older to him than he is to us now across the 25 centuries that separate his world from ours. He arrived with questions, as travellers always do, and he listened to the stories told by priests and guides whose ancestors had been telling those same stories for generations beyond counting. He wrote down what he heard, that Pharaoh Khufu was buried in a chamber beneath the pyramid on an island surrounded by water, that underground channels connected these chambers to the Nile, that the construction of the pyramids had required technologies and techniques that seemed almost impossible even to describe. He admitted freely in his writings that he had not seen everything himself, that some accounts came from sources he could not verify, that he was recording the collective memory of a civilization rather than documenting archaeological fact. And for more than 2,000 years, scholars dismissed him. Herodotus, the storyteller, they called him. Herodotus the credulous tourist who believed whatever his guides told him. His accounts were filed away as interesting myths, colourful legends, the exaggerated tales of a bygone era that bore little relationship to reality. Then, in 1999, archaeologists pumped the water from the Osiris shaft and found an island in the darkness, exactly as Herodotus had described. The stone platform rising from the bedrock, water surrounding it on all sides, a massive sarcophagus waiting in that underground chamber. The Greek historian had been right, or right enough that his words matched what modern excavators found when they finally reached the lowest level of that vertical tunnel. This vindication changes something fundamental about how we approach ancient sources. If Herodotus was right about the island, what else might he have been right about? What other stories dismissed as legends might contain kernels of truth, waiting to be confirmed by patient archaeology and improving technology? Herodotus was not the only ancient writer to describe underground structures at Giza and elsewhere in Egypt. Strabo, a Greek geographer who lived several centuries later, wrote of labyrinthine passages and chambers that exceeded even the pyramids in complexity. Medieval Arab writers documented tunnels they claimed to have entered, passages that supposedly connected the pyramids to each other and to chambers filled with astronomical instruments and ancient knowledge. Most dramatically, ancient sources described a structure called the Labyrinth, near the Pyramid of Hawara, a complex supposedly containing thousands of rooms both above and below ground, a building so vast and intricate that it made the pyramids seem simple by comparison. For centuries, this too was dismissed as exaggeration, the kind of hyperbole that ancient writers employed to impress their readers. Then, in 2008, a Belgian-Egyptian research team used ground-penetrating radar to survey the area around the Hawara pyramid. They detected something beneath the sand, evidence of a large underground structure consistent with the ancient descriptions of the lost labyrinth. The data suggested a massive complex of chambers and passages, precisely where the old texts said it would be. Excavation has not been permitted. The water table in that area is high, making exploration difficult and potentially dangerous to any structures that might exist below. But the radar showed something, a ghost beneath the sand that aligns with stories told when Egypt was young. This pattern repeats across the archaeological record. Ancient sources describe underground chambers, modern scholars dismiss these descriptions as myth. Then technology improves, excavation becomes possible, and what do we find? Chambers, islands, water, passages that end in darkness or perhaps continue beyond walls we have not yet breached. The ancient writers were not perfect historians by our modern standards. They mixed what they saw with what they heard, blended fact with interpretation, sometimes confused symbolic truth with literal description. But they were not fabricating from nothing. They were recording a collective memory, preserving stories that had been passed down through generations, keeping alive knowledge that might otherwise have been lost entirely. Think about what it means for a story to survive 2,000 years, to be told and retold across centuries of conquest and upheaval, through the rise and fall of dynasties and religions and empires. The stories that survive that long, that persist through such transformations, often contain something worth preserving, some essential truth that resonates across the ages. Herodotus listened to those stories and wrote them down. Modern archaeology has proven him more reliable than scholars once believed. Perhaps we should listen more carefully to what the ancients remembered, what they thought important enough to preserve in writing, when writing itself required immense effort. In the next part of our journey, we will confront the claims we cannot yet prove, the discoveries announced with great fanfare that may or may not withstand scrutiny, learning to distinguish patient science from hopeful speculation. In March of 2025, headlines spread across the world with a speed that ancient secrets rarely achieve. A team of Italian researchers standing before delegates in Cairo announced they had found something unprecedented beneath the Pyramid of Khafra. Not a single chamber, not a modest tunnel. They spoke of 8 enormous cylindrical shafts descending deep into the earth, of spiral pathways surrounding these shafts, of a network extending more than 2,000 feet below the surface. They spoke of a hidden city. The announcement carried the weight of modern technology behind it. Satellite-based synthetic aperture radar combined with artificial intelligence tools that seemed almost magical in their ability to peer through stone from orbit. The researchers presented their data with confidence, and for a moment, the world imagined vast chambers waiting in the darkness, an underground metropolis that had somehow escaped detection for 45 centuries. Then came the questions, as questions always come when extraordinary claims emerge. Radar specialists from universities around the world examined the methodology and expressed doubts about whether any technology could penetrate that deep through solid limestone with sufficient resolution to make such specific claims. Former ministers of antiquities who'd spent lifetimes studying these monuments issued careful responses, noting that radar returns can be interpreted in many ways, that what looks like a chamber might be a natural void or a variation in rock density, that certainty requires excavation and verification. The Egyptian government distanced itself from the claims. No permits were granted for excavation. The scientific community settled into a familiar pattern of debate, some researchers defending the possibility, while others dismissed it entirely, and most occupying the uncomfortable middle ground of uncertainty. This is not a new pattern. Every few years, someone announces a dramatic discovery at Giza. Secret chambers beneath the Sphinx, tunnels connecting all 3 pyramids, halls filled with the lost knowledge of vanished civilizations. The announcements generate headlines and excitement and speculation. Then comes the slow work of verification, the patient process of peer review and replication, and often, though not always, the claims fade away like morning mist under the desert sun. The challenge for anyone trying to understand what lies beneath the pyramids is learning to distinguish between patient science and hopeful speculation, between discoveries confirmed by multiple independent methods and claims based on single data sets that others cannot verify. This is harder than it sounds, especially in an age when viral headlines spread faster than careful research, when the drama of discovery sells better than the quiet accumulation of evidence. What we can say about the Italian claims is this: they remain unverified. The technology they used is real, but its limitations at such depths are not fully understood. The interpretations they offered are possible, but so are many other explanations for the same data. Without excavation, without direct exploration, without confirmation from independent teams using different methods, we simply do not know whether a hidden city waits beneath Khafra's pyramid, or whether the radar detected natural variations in geology that happened to create patterns resembling human construction. And perhaps that uncertainty is acceptable. Perhaps it is even necessary. The pyramids have survived 45 centuries precisely because they resist easy answers, because they hold their mysteries close, because they demand patience from those who would understand them. A hidden city would be remarkable if proven true, but the absence of a hidden city would not diminish the genuine mysteries that do exist. The chambers that have been found, the voids detected by multiple methods, the islands in the darkness that vindicated ancient historians. The difference between science and mythology is not that science provides all the answers immediately. The difference is that science waits for confirmation, builds knowledge slowly through multiple lines of evidence, accepts uncertainty as a temporary condition rather than rushing to fill every gap with speculation. The Osiris shaft was claimed and dismissed and finally excavated, proving its existence beyond doubt. The Big Void was detected by multiple teams using the same technology, its presence confirmed through patient observation. These discoveries stand firm because they followed the methodical path of verification. The 2025 claims may eventually join that list of confirmed discoverers, or they may fade into the long catalogue of unverified speculation. Time will tell, as time always tells in archaeology, moving at a pace measured in decades and grants, and careful excavation rather than headlines and press conferences. What matters for our journey is not whether every claim proves true, but whether we can hold mystery and skepticism together, wondering without demanding immediate answers, patient as the stone itself. In the next part of our exploration, we will consider water's deeper role at Giza, how this element shaped both construction and ritual, how the aquifer beneath the plateau may be as important as the monuments above it. Water runs beneath the Giza plateau the way blood runs through living tissue, invisible from the surface but essential, present, shaping everything that exists above it. The aquifer sits 20 to 30 meters below the sand and limestone, Fed by the Nile in ways we do not fully understand, rising and falling with seasons that have cycled for millennia, patient as only water can be patient. The ancient Egyptians knew about this water. They encountered it when they quarried limestone from the plateau, cutting blocks for temples and pyramids and causeways. They understood how the water table rose during the Nile's annual flood and receded when the river fell. They would have known that digging deep enough meant finding water, that the bedrock was not solid and dry all the way down but permeated with moisture that seeped up from below. Some researchers now believe the builders incorporated this water into their designs deliberately, that the underground chambers were not fighting against the aquifer but working with it, using it for purposes both practical and symbolic. The subterranean chamber beneath Khufu's pyramid, with its strange floor carved to resemble the Nile Valley. The Osiris shaft with its island surrounded by water that rises and falls with the seasons. These may not be accidents of geology but intentional creations, places where water was meant to flow, meant to flood, meant to create islands in the darkness as permanent symbols of myths that could not be carved in stone alone. Water may have played an even larger role in the construction of the pyramids themselves. Recent theories suggest that channels feeding from the Nile could have transported massive stone blocks on barges right to the base of the monuments, that the entire Giza plateau might have been crisscrossed with canals and waterways during the building phase, most of which have long since dried up or been buried by sand. Hydraulic systems might have lifted heavy stones using water's power, ancient engineering that understood pressure and flow in ways we are only beginning to appreciate. If this is true, then the underground world of Giza is far more complex than we have imagined. The shafts and tunnels we have found may be only a small fraction of what exists. Beneath the sand, beneath the limestone, beneath the monuments themselves, a network of channels might extend across the entire plateau, some natural and some carved by human hands, all of them connected to the aquifer that continues to feed water into chambers that have waited in darkness for 45 centuries. But water at Giza was never just practical. In Egyptian cosmology, water represented primordial chaos, the state that existed before creation, the infinite ocean from which the first land emerged when the gods brought order to the universe. The Nile was sacred not merely because it provided irrigation, but because it embodied the eternal cycle of chaos and order, death and resurrection, the annual flood that destroyed and created in the same gesture. An underground chamber that flooded naturally would have been more than a burial place. It would have been a physical manifestation of the journey every soul had to make through the waters of the underworld to reach the afterlife, through darkness and dissolution to eventual resurrection. Osiris himself was associated with water, with the Nile, with the flooding that brought life back to the land after the dry season's death. The island in the Osiris shaft, surrounded by water that rises and falls with rhythms older than memory, makes perfect sense in this context. Not as a failed construction or a random feature of geology, but as a deliberate recreation of mythological geography, a place where the boundary between the living world and the afterlife could be rendered in stone and water, permanent and accessible to those who knew how to find it. We cannot prove these interpretations with certainty. The ancient builders left no written explanations for why they carved what they carved, why they positioned chambers at specific depths, why they allowed water to flood spaces that modern engineers would try to keep dry. But we can observe that water appears again and again in the underground structures at Giza, not as an obstacle to be overcome, but as a presence to be accommodated, perhaps even celebrated. The water waits beneath the plateau still, rising in the Osiris shaft, seeping into the subterranean chamber, filling voids we have not yet discovered. It is patient in a way that stone cannot match, flowing around obstacles, finding paths through the smallest cracks, wearing away resistance not through force but through endless gentle persistence. In the next part of our journey, we will confront the dreamers and mystics who have projected their own visions onto these ancient stones, learning to distinguish between genuine mystery and wishful mythology, between the questions the pyramids actually ask and the answers we sometimes provide without evidence. In 1932, a man named Edgar Cayce, who called himself a psychic and claimed to receive visions while in trance states, made a prediction that would capture imaginations for generations. He spoke of a hall of records hidden beneath the Sphinx at Giza, a chamber containing the lost wisdom of Atlantis. that legendary civilization that supposedly sank beneath the ocean thousands of years before the pyramids were built. According to Casey, this haul would be discovered before the end of the 20th century, revealing knowledge that would transform human understanding of our ancient past. The prediction was specific and dramatic and utterly unverified. No excavation beneath the Sphinx has ever found such a chamber. The end of the 20th century came and went without any hall of records emerging from the bedrock. Casey's prophecy, like so many prophecies, dissolved into the category of things that sound profound but led nowhere when tested against physical reality. And yet, something interesting happens when you examine the pattern of such claims. The dreamers and mystics who project their visions onto the pyramids are often wrong about the specifics, wrong about locations and dates and what will be found, but they are responding to something real, something genuine about these monuments that invites speculation precisely because so much remains unknown. The pyramids do hide secrets. There are chambers we have not found, voids detected but not explored, passages that end in walls we have not breached. The underground world of Giza is more complex and mysterious than mainstream archaeology acknowledged for centuries. Herodotus was dismissed as a fantasist, and then the Osiris shaft proved him right about islands in the darkness. The ancients spoke of labyrinths, and ground-penetrating radar found evidence of massive structures beneath the sand. The problem with mystics like Casey is not that they sense mystery where none exists. The problem is that they fill uncertainty with specific claims that cannot be verified, that they mistake their desire for answers as equivalent to actual discovery. A hall of records would be wonderful if it existed, but wanting it to exist does not make it real, and claiming to know where it is through psychic visions does not constitute evidence. What archaeology teaches us, slowly and patiently over decades and centuries, is that reality is often stranger and more interesting than our fantasies about it. No one predicted the big void before muon detectors revealed it. No one imagined a corridor sealed behind chevron stones until cameras pushed through and saw it. The actual discoveries at Giza have a quality of strangeness that pure imagination rarely achieves, a sense that the ancient builders were thinking in ways we do not quite grasp, building for purposes we have not fully understood. The challenge is holding two truths together without letting them collapse into each other. The first truth is that genuine mysteries exist, that the pyramids and the plateau beneath them contain secrets we have not yet uncovered. The second truth is that not every claim of hidden chambers and lost knowledge deserves equal consideration, that some mysteries are genuine while others are projections of what we wish were true. This is harder than it sounds. We live in an age where spectacular claims spread faster than careful corrections, where the drama of a hall of records beneath the Sphinx generates more interest than the patient accumulation of evidence about water tables and construction techniques. The pyramids have become screens onto which we project our dreams of ancient wisdom and lost civilizations, and separating those dreams from the stone reality requires constant effort and discipline, but the stone is patient. The chambers that exist will eventually be found through methodical exploration and improving technology. The chambers that do not exist will remain unfound no matter how many psychics claim to see them in visions. Time sorts truth from fantasy with absolute reliability, though it works slowly, too slowly for those who want immediate revelation. The pyramids deserve better than our fantasies, deserve to be understood for what they actually are rather than what we wish them to be. In the next part of our journey, we will consider the human beings who built these monuments, whose names are mostly lost but whose work endures, asking what drove them to carve chambers deep in bedrock and pile stones into mountains. Somewhere beneath the Giza plateau, in chambers carved from bedrock 45 centuries ago, the marks of copper tools are still visible on the stone. You can see where the workers struck the limestone, the patterns their chisels made, the slow progress of excavation rendered permanent in the walls. These marks are the closest we come to meeting the people who built these underground spaces, anonymous labourers whose names have been lost but whose work endures. We know almost nothing about them as individuals. No inscriptions name the men who descended into the earth with lamps and tools, who carved the subterranean chamber and the Osiris shaft, who cut passages that extend into bedrock and end in walls we still have not breached. The pharaohs are remembered: Khufu, Khafre, Menkaure. Their names survive in stone and papyrus, their monuments dominating the plateau. But the thousands of workers who actually built these structures, who planned the angles and measured the depths and swung the tools that cut through solid rock, they have vanished into the anonymity that claims most human lives regardless of what we accomplish. What drove them to dig so deep? The practical answer is that they were following orders, fulfilling the requirements of royal burials and religious rituals that demanded chambers beneath the earth. But there is something in the execution that goes beyond mere obedience. The precision of the cuts in the Osiris shaft, the deliberate shaping of the subterranean chamber's floor, the sheer ambition of carving spaces 30 meters below the surface using only copper tools and human labor. All of this suggests workers who took pride in their craft, who understood they were building for eternity. They worked by lamplight in spaces that had never seen the sun, breathing air that grew thick as they descended deeper, knowing that the chambers they carved would outlast their own lives by thousands of years. The water table was lower then than it became in later centuries, but they still would have encountered moisture seeping from the rock, still would have known that eventually these chambers might flood, that the aquifer below would claim what they had carved from it. Perhaps they did not see this as a problem. Perhaps they understood, in ways we are only beginning to grasp, that water was meant to be part of these spaces, that the flooding was not a failure of engineering but a feature of the design. The island in the Osiris shaft makes sense only if someone intended for water to surround it, if the entire structure was planned with the aquifer in mind rather than despite it. Dating these underground structures remains challenging. The artifacts found in the Osiris shaft suggest use during the late period of Egyptian history, nearly 2,000 years after the pyramids were built. But the construction technique of the deepest chamber, the precision and ambition of the carving, points to greater antiquity. Did workers of the Old Kingdom create the original shaft, with later Egyptians expanding and modifying it for their own purposes? Were the chambers reused across millennia, serving different functions in different eras, accumulating layers of meaning the way stone accumulates layers of mineral deposits? We cannot answer these questions with certainty. What we can say is that human beings, working with tools we would consider primitive, created spaces that continue to amaze us, that hide secrets we are still discovering with technologies the ancient builders could never have imagined. They built for permanence knowing they themselves were temporary, carved their work into bedrock that would outlast dynasties and empires and entire civilizations. There is something profoundly human in this impulse to create monuments that transcend our individual lives, to invest enormous effort in structures we will never see completed or whose purpose will only be fulfilled after we are gone. The workers who carved the underground chambers at Giza were not aliens or members of lost advanced civilizations. They were people like us, with the same fundamental desires to leave something behind, to mark our passage through time with works that endure. Their names are lost, but their chambers remain, waiting in the darkness with a patience that only stone and human ambition working together can achieve. In the final part of our journey, we will rest in that darkness, allowing the mysteries to remain mysterious, accepting that some questions have answers we have not yet found and may not find for generations to come. We have descended together through layers of stone and time, from the bright surface where tourists gather to the deepest chambers where water and darkness meet. We have explored what has been found and what remains hidden, separated patient science from hopeful speculation, listened to ancient voices that prove more reliable than scholars once believed, and now, at the end of our journey, we arrive at the most important truth of all. The mysteries remain. Beneath the Giza plateau, chambers wait that we have not yet discovered. Passages extend beyond walls we have not breached. Water rises and falls in the darkness with rhythms older than human memory. The subterranean chamber holds its strange floor and its dead-end corridor and its pit filled with rubble from explorers who came before. The Osiris shaft keeps its island and its empty sarcophagus 30 meters below the footsteps of people who do not know it exists. The big void sits above the Grand Gallery, detected by cosmic rays but never entered, its purpose unknown, its contents unimaginable. These are not failures of archaeology. They are reminders that some secrets keep themselves until the right moment arrives, until technology improves enough to see what could not be seen before, until someone asks a question in exactly the right way to reveal an answer that was always there, waiting. The Italian researchers who claimed to find a hidden city beneath Khafra's pyramid may prove correct or may prove mistaken. Time will tell, as time always tells in matters involving stone and earth and patient excavation. The claims Herodotus made about underground chambers seemed like fantasy for 25 centuries before the Osiris shaft proved him right. Perhaps other claims dismissed today will be vindicated tomorrow or in another generation or in another century. Or perhaps they will fade away, replaced by discoveries no one predicted, chambers in locations no psychic ever envisioned. What we know for certain is this: the pyramids were built to outlast human memory, and they have succeeded beyond any reasonable expectation. They stand against the sky while civilizations rise and fall around them, while languages are born and die, while technologies advance from copper tools to cosmic ray detectors, and beneath them, carved into bedrock that existed before Egypt, and will exist after all our works have turned to dust, chambers wait, with a patience that makes centuries feel like moments. The workers who carved those chambers are gone, their names lost, but their ambition endures. They built for permanence knowing they themselves were temporary. They created mysteries without intending to, simply by working in stone that would outlast explanation, by incorporating water and darkness and symbolic geography into structures whose full meaning we may never completely grasp. Perhaps we're not meant to understand everything immediately. Perhaps mystery itself has value. The uncertainty that keeps us wondering, keeps us developing better tools and asking better questions, keeps us humble in the face of achievements we cannot quite replicate or fully explain. The pyramids teach patience to every generation that studies them, whispering that some answers come slowly or not at all, that wondering is sometimes more important than knowing. In the subterranean chamber beneath Khufu's pyramid, that strange floor continues to puzzle researchers who descend into the darkness. The passage still ends in its blank wall. The pit still hides whatever it hides beneath rubble and groundwater. Perhaps one day someone will break through that wall or dig deeper into that pit and find something extraordinary. Or perhaps the chamber has already revealed everything it contains, and the mystery lies not in hidden spaces, but in our inability to read what is plainly visible. The Osiris shaft keeps its water rising and falling with the seasons, the island maintaining its vigil in the darkness, the sarcophagus waiting empty for a king who may never have been intended to lie there, for a ritual we can only imagine, for purposes that made perfect sense to the builders and remain just beyond our full comprehension. This is acceptable. This is enough. The pyramids can wait. They have waited this long, through invasions and excavations and technologies that would seem like magic to the people who built them. They can wait while we develop better methods, ask better questions, slowly accumulate understanding one careful observation at a time. And if you find yourself drifting away while listening to these words, that is perfectly fine. The chambers will be there tomorrow and the day after and 45 centuries from now if humanity survives that long. The darkness beneath the pyramids is patient beyond measure. It understands that sleep and wonder are close cousins, that rest and curiosity can coexist, that some mysteries are best contemplated in the space between waking and dreaming, where the mind wanders freely and time dissolves. What lies beneath the pyramids? Water and stone and darkness and secrets. Chambers we have found and chambers we have not found. Islands in the darkness, passages that end or perhaps continue. The marks of copper tools on ancient stone. The patient waiting of bedrock that has supported these monuments through all of human history and will support them still when we are gone. The silence down there is perfect and complete, broken only by the occasional drip of water finding its way through microscopic cracks, the settling of stone under its own impossible weight, the whisper of mysteries that may or may not ever be solved. Rest in that silence. The pyramids understand. They have all the time in the world.